Radio's own show, Behind the Mic. Radio. With the switch of a dial, radio brings you tragedy, comedy, entertainment, information, education, a whole world at your command. But there are stories behind radio. Stories behind your favorite program and favorite personalities and radio people you never hear of. Stories as amusing, dramatic, and as interesting as any make-believe stories you hear on the air. And that's what we give you. The human interest, the glamour, the tragedy, the comedy, and information that are behind the mic. And now presenting the man whose name has long been a symbol of the best in broadcasting, Graham McNamee.
Thank you, Gilbert Martin, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the radio audience. This afternoon, Behind the Mic presents an amazing story of the persistence and courage of a radio singer, Karen Kemple. Proof that radio stars and radio audiences have their hearts in the right place, as shown by an incident in which radio MC Walter Compton and movie and stage star Lyle Talbot played the part. And finally, the thrilling story behind the invention of the wireless telephone and the Audion, or radio tube, presented as a tribute to their inventor, Dr. Lee De Forrest, who will speak to you later from Los Angeles. Radio is full of instances of people determined to succeed in spite of handicaps, and that brings us to our first guest, Karen Kemple.
Suppose I tell you first how I conquered my handicap, Graham.
Well, that'll be fine. Go ahead.
Well, I used to be in vaudeville as a dancer, also doing a little professional ice skating. Several years ago, I played in a skating scene in an RKO picture. In between film takes, I used to sit around the rink without adequate wraps. One day, I found myself in the Cedars of Lebanon Hospital with pneumonia, leading to empyema and a collapsed lung. I was in the hospital 7.5 months, Graham. As I was leaving, the doctor said to me,
"Well, Karen, what are you going to do now?"
"I guess I'll be going back to my family in St. Louis."
I see. I suppose you know, Karen, that you'll never be able to dance or skate or take any violent exercise again?
Yes, Doctor, I know. But, Graham, I needed the money. So 2 months after getting back to St. Louis, I went to work as a dancer in a supper club.
In spite of the fact that the doctor had told you to take no violent exercise.
Yes, Graham. I used to put a hot water bottle under my coat on my way to work to ease the pain in my side. It was pretty tough. In the meantime, I started to exercise my lungs. The doctor had given me 2 bottles full of colored fluid connected by tubes. I was supposed to use the tubes to blow the fluid from one bottle to the other as a breathing exercise. The first time, it took me 20 or more breaths to do it. Then a friend of mine, a singing teacher, came to me and said,
"Karen, as long as you're doing these breathing exercises with the bottles, don't you think that singing lessons might help your lungs? It's exercise, too. And besides, you've always had a good voice."
"Well, I'm not making much money now. Maybe if I sing, I could have a better future." "All right, when do we start?" At first, I couldn't practice singing more than 3 or 4 minutes at a time. Then I increased my practicing to a half hour or more. Meanwhile, I found that where at the beginning it had taken me about 20 breaths to blow that liquid from one bottle to another, now I could do it in one.
You certainly were improving, Karen.
Yes. And then about a year later, I auditioned for station KMOX in St. Louis and started to broadcast. Then came a few commercials, and later a station in Cincinnati offered me a staff job as well as a number of commercials. 2.5 years later, I received an offer from NBC, and I've been in New York ever since.
And ladies and gentlemen, Miss Kemple makes recordings which are played on 240 stations throughout the country. And this is the girl who had a collapsed lung and was relegated to the status of a semi-invalid. And now Karen Kemple will sing for us Amapola.
Amapola,
Amapola, lindissima amapola, sarà sempre mia alma tuya sola. Yo te quiero, amada niña mía, igual que ama la flor la luz del día. Amapola, lindissima amapola, non sei tan ingrata e amami. Amapola, amapola, ¿cómo puedes tú vivir tan sola? De amor en los hierros de tu rea, de amor escuché la triste queja, de amor que sonó en mi corazón, diciéndome así con su dulce canción. Amapola, lindissima amapola. Yo te quiero, amada niña mía. Amapola, lindissima amapola, non sei tan ingrata, amami. Amapola, amapola, ¿cómo puedes tú vivir?
Thank you, Karen Kemple. Thank you. There's certainly nothing wrong with your lungs now, and your voice is delightful. Ladies and gentlemen, radio is full of human interest, and both radio people and the folks who listen to radio are a pretty decent sort. You don't have to take my word for it. Just listen to this story, and you will find out for yourselves. This is a little story behind the broadcast of that popular program, Double or Nothing. And here is the program's master of ceremonies, Walter Compton. Hi, Walter. What is this story?
Well, Graham, as in the case with practically all quiz-type programs, Double or Nothing pays for questions submitted by listeners. A few weeks ago, a question was sent to us by Mrs. Mabel Hicken of Duluth, Minnesota, which said,
Dear Double or Nothing, I am sending this question with the hope in my heart that you will use it on your program. The question is, what is the Seeing Eye Institute? I hope you will use it because I have a son who is blind, and the money I might get for this question I will put towards paying for a course of training for my son at the Seeing Eye Institute, where he can learn to make proper use of the Seeing Eye dog.
Graham, one of the guests on our show that night was Lyle Talbot, star of motion pictures and co-starring with Alan Dinehart and Glenda Farrell in the Broadway play Separate Rooms. On that program, the first question I asked was, here is a question sent in by Mabel Hicken of Duluth, and she gets $5 for it. Lyle, what is the Seeing Eye Institute?
It's an institute which trains dogs to be guides for the blind.
Right. And that's worth $5 to you, Lyle Talbot. Now, you go on and talk for a minute, giving me as many facts as you possibly can about the Seeing Eye Institute. I'll tell you how much each fact is worth as you give it.
All right. Well, let me see. The Seeing Eye Institute is in Morristown, New Jersey.
That's worth $2.
I believe it was started in 1928.
Right, 1928. I think that's worth $4 silver.
And the Seeing Eye dogs are, usually German Shepherds, I think, and they...
Say, you've done all right, Lyle Talbot. You have $24 silver to your credit. Now then, Double or Nothing.
Shoot, Walter.
Who invented the system of reading for the blind?
Well, it's called the Braille system, so I imagine it was invented by a man named, wait a minute, I remember, Louis Braille.
That is correct, sir. 48 silver dollars plus the $5 you've already earned, which makes a total of 53 silver dollars in all. Incidentally, Lyle, the lady who sent in that question will be mighty happy that we used it and that you answered it so well because, you see, she mentioned in her letter that she has a blind son. And at the $5 she receives for her question, she's going to use to help pay for a course of training at the Seeing Eye Institute for the boy so that he can learn the proper use of a seeing eye dog. You have to be trained for that, you know.
Well, I'll tell you, Walter, if that's the case, I want you to take this $53 now and send it to Mrs. Hicken to put towards paying for that course for her son. I feel she earned it.
Oh, Lyle, that's very generous of you. With the $5 she gets for a question, that'll make $58 altogether.
Is that the end of the story, Walter?
Oh, no, Graham, not by a long shot. Letters poured into the Duluth studio, the city where Mrs. Hicken lived. They came from all over the country as well, and a great deal more than the $150 for Mrs. Hicken's son was collected. The contributors were asked whether they would have any objection if the additional money was forwarded to the Seeing Eye Institute, and not one objected.
Of course not. The radio listener is a pretty good guy at heart, and so is Lyle Talbot. Our thanks to Lyle Talbot and to you, Walter Compton, for a most interesting story. And now, to celebrate the 34th anniversary of the invention of the wireless telephone, from which radio, such as we know it today, springs, we pay tribute to its inventor, radio's first genius, Dr. Lee De Forrest. There's tremendous drama behind his two greatest discoveries, the audion, or radio tube, without which radio couldn't function today, and the wireless telephone. This afternoon, we give you some of that magnificent story, the authentic details of which have been supplied to us by Lee De Forrest Chief Assistant Frank E. Butler, who is here in the studio. We take you back to 1907, to an attic in one of New York City's great skyscrapers, the Parker Building, a hall of 13 stories high, where Dr. Lee De Forrest, his brother Charles De Forrest, Frank Butler, and a couple of other loyal assistants living on their meager savings so that they could experiment with De Forrest, were examining a remarkable device in wireless reception.
Well, there it is, boys. There's the tube.
And it works, Doc.
It certainly does.
And what an improvement over those crystal detectors. No cat's whisker to break off every time there's static.
And you can certainly hear more clearly with it, too.
What are you going to call it, Lee? Well, how about audion, Charlie? Because it does make ions audible. That's just the name for it.
Lee, what do you intend to do with it?
Well, Frank, after we experiment a little more with it, I'm going to take it down to the Navy Department at Washington, see if I can sell them on the idea of using it on the battleships to receive wireless messages.
Yes, instead of crystal receivers they have now. They certainly ought to buy it.
So not long afterwards, Lee De Forrest took his radio detector, consisting of its newfangled audion, or radio tube, encased in a mahogany box with a little peep window in it so you could see if the tube was burning, a pair of earphones, and a Weatherby storage battery down to Washington to demonstrate his invention for receiving wireless messages before a board of naval experts. After the demonstration, there was a conference, and then...
Mr. De Forrest, we have decided definitely not to purchase your new wireless receiver. In the first place, the price is prohibitive. You want $30 for this equipment.
Well, that includes the storage battery.
Yes, I know, but it's much too much. Secondly, this new equipment of yours is impractical, because unlike our present crystal receiver, your equipment requires a storage battery, which will have to be replaced or recharged, perhaps in the very middle of a message. And then we don't like the idea of using a storage battery in wireless equipment. Anyway, the acid from the battery will spill with the motion of the ship and spoil the deck of the wireless room.
Yes, but couldn't the storage battery be slung in a cradle underneath the table so it would sway with the motion of the ship? Then the acid wouldn't spill.
No. And furthermore, the tube is very short-lived, and we don't think it's reliable. And, your invention is new, untried, and it isn't standard equipment. I'm sorry, Mr. De Forrest.
This was a discouraging blow. The radio tube